What's up, everyone? Welcome back. We've got George and Max. We're going through every single MCU project. Tonight we're talking about Spider-Man: Homecoming. It is the second reboot of Spider-Man. Tom Holland is making his second appearance in the MCU. And without further ado, welcome back to the rewatch. George, start us off. Give me your thoughts, comments, questions, concerns. Go.
Thoughts, comments, questions, concerns. You should have let me know before we started recording that I would have to answer a full quiz. All right. Tom Holland is the best, pausing for dramatic effect, at playing Peter Parker as a kid. He's the one who feels the most like a kid. No one buys, 60-year-old Tobey Maguire in 2002. I'm exaggerating.
No, he was actually 60 in 2002. A lot of people don't know that.
He's late 20s and looks, early 20s at youngest to play a high school kid.
I mean, it helps that he goes to college in Spider-Man 2, but not by that much.
Right, but still.
That's your point taken.
And, Andrew Garfield, no one buys those cheekbones as anything younger than mid-20s. Tom Holland looks like a kid, and his energy as Peter Parker and as Spider-Man, spoiler alert, it's a double life. Peter Parker is Spider-Man. He plays the energy of a kid, which I think I really love in his performance, and that carries throughout Infinity War, briefly in Endgame, Far From Home, even the beginning of Spider-Man: No Way Home. Still get that kid energy. That's probably the biggest positive. Michael Keaton's performance as the Vulture is tremendous. There's so much depth to the character. He makes it really well-rounded. The reveal of his character being Peter's love interest, Liz's father. I read before I watched the film that there was a reveal involving his character. I didn't know what it was going to be, and then when that happened, my jaw dropped. So that's really well executed. The scene in the car with the traffic light changing when he figures out that Peter is Spider-Man, which is probably, I've said this too many times on this podcast or on the rewatch, it's probably a top 3 moment in the MCU. I've got about 40 top 3 moments in the MCU. But, this film has a lot of strengths, mostly from its cast. Michael Giacchino, again, with the score, making that Spider-Man theme feel fresh, introducing his own pieces. Tony Stark is in this one. I talked about the cast and then was going creative, but I'll talk about the cast a little bit more. I like the inclusion of Tony Stark. I think he fills a good Uncle Ben type mentor role, father figure. Happy Hogan, Aunt May, Ned, MJ. It's a solid group, and John Watts does a good job with the direction. My only problem with the film is when it takes a detour, and it does this a lot, and my ranking and rating will reflect that. It takes a detour from the superhero action comedy to awkward teen high school romance movie, which I've never been fond of those movies. But
so you passed my quiz. Well done.
Excuse my 5-minute rant.
No, that's good.
On the whole, I like it.
Yeah. And for the most part, I agree with you. I think speaking of fresh, it is fresh to not get a Spider-Man origin story where we have to see Uncle Ben die.
Well, also, we don't need to see the spider bite.
No, that too. Like, he already has his powers. Uncle Ben is either dead or just doesn't exist. We don't know. It doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't, right? Because we have Peter, we have May, we have Tony, we have all these characters that can sort of, in the aggregate, taking some words from one of my other favorite films that is not MCU, Moneyball, taking them in the aggregate and making sort of an Uncle Ben type atmosphere, right? Peter and Spider-Man have these he has these mentor figures around him. I think where I do disagree with you a little bit is in that I think it works that it is an awkward teen high school rom-com type energy sometimes. I think it works. I really do. And the reason I think that is because I think it's juxtaposed against Peter's thinking that he is destined and deserves to be out there in the world being an Avenger and doing things outside of his scope. And Tony is trying to keep him grounded as the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. And Peter can do that, right? Peter can be the awkward teen. He can have a love interest. He can learn how to tie a tie from the internet. He can go to school dances. He can have awkward interactions with Liz's father and just, like all love interests do, right? That's always going to be awkward. But Spider-Man can't. Spider-Man, he thinks that he's ready for something bigger and better. And Tony's trying to keep him on the ground. And I think that's why it works, is that there are two distinct sides to the character, and where they overlap is where things start to go wrong. For instance, a Staten Island ferry is where basically splits in half and a bunch of cars fall in, and Iron Man comes in and saves the day. But Spider-Man couldn't handle that. He couldn't even handle that. And what makes him think that he's ready for an Avengers level threat? Just because he went to Berlin in Civil War? I don't think so. So that's why I like that aspect of this film, and it's a very distinct two lives, and I like that a lot.
Yeah, you definitely get a big sense of the duality of the character. Mm-hmm. Peter and Spider-Man, while they overlap, again, Washington, D.C. is a big example of that. Spider-Man wouldn't have been in D.C. if Peter wasn't in D.C. That's how that sequence comes to pass. You get to see the two sides of the character, and a great comp for Spider-Man is Bruce Banner and the Hulk, because that is quite literally two sides of a coin. And Peter is trying to figure out what kind of coin he is, how to balance the two sides, which I think Bruce Banner has figured out by the time Homecoming rolls around. Well, not quite, even though he's always angry in the Avengers, and Natasha needs the other guy in Age of Ultron. Obviously he's not Professor Hulk yet, but I'm getting off topic. I think Peter, the way Tom Holland portrays Peter, allows him to explore that double life in a way that you don't really get the awkwardness of Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker. You don't really get the coolness of Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. You're sort of an amalgamation, a little bit of a combination, and yet it's its own thing.
Yeah.
So I think everything in a Spider-Man movie comes down to the actor playing Peter Parker and Spider-Man. And for Tom Holland to step into this role in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, he's not just being in a Spider-Man reboot, he's being in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think that takes a lot of work as an actor, and he navigates it in a way that makes the character his own, which I think is the biggest strength of this film. But again, my jam is the action, my jam is the superhero stuff. It just felt like the pacing was a big issue with going to the other side of his life.
Sure.
But again, that's the nature of a Spider-Man movie, is you got to see both sides.
Yeah. And, I think part of this film is the job of this film is to find its footing. And that's reflected in the characters as much as it is in the pacing and the plot of the movie.
Yeah.
So let's get into some rankings and ratings. I know these are going to be a lot higher than what we ranked Guardians 2. So George, why don't you start with your ranking and then give us your score out of 100?
Yeah. So my ranking for Spider-Man Homecoming, I said for my Iron Man rewatch that it was right at the top of the second half, top of the bottom half. Spider-Man Homecoming is right at the bottom of the top half. I'm going to throw it 16th out of the 32 projects. Again, it's a lot of fun. I love Tom Holland's Peter Parker and Spider-Man. I love the cast: Michael Keaton, Robert Downey Jr., Jon Favreau, Marissa Tomei. List goes on and on. Jacob Batalon, the guy in the chair. Even the way MJ is characterized in this film, I think, is the best she is in the first two Spider-Man MCU films. Even though she's a bigger role in Far From Home, I like her more in Homecoming. I just think she's a fun take on the character in this one.
For sure.
And then as for my 0 to 100 score, it's in that B range. I'm going to give it an 83. I think it falls right in that same territory of Iron Man, where it's just, we said this too many times on the rewatch. There's just too many projects I like more than it. But Homecoming, it's John Watts, it's Michael Giacchino, it's Tom Holland. It's going to be a winner.
Yeah. So I'm going to be a little bit higher for both of them. It is in my top 10. In fact, it is number 10 out of 32 for me. Like I said before, I love that there is that duality and a very clear distinction between Peter Parker and Spider-Man in terms of who they are, who they interact with, how they interact with whomever. The pacing wasn't as big of an issue for me. I did notice that there were some pacing issues, but I still think it found its way to work within that awkward realm without it being too much. Sometimes it was, but for the most part, it did it well. But yeah, great film. Really enjoyed it. So I'm going to give it a 90 out of 100. That brings it into the A- range, so very high score. So it did really well, and that's a great kickoff for the next two films, Far From Home and No Way Home, which we'll be talking about later. So I think that's going to do it for us tonight. We will be back at you tomorrow with Thor Ragnarok, a big film in the MCU. Going to be a lot of fun to talk about. Lots of great characters. So without delaying you too much longer, we're going to sign off. So good night, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Mañana.